now to the latest on Israel's war with Hamas. As Israel continues to pummel Gaza from the air and from the ground, Gaza's health ministry, which is controlled by Hamas, says that 20,000 people have died there since Israel's campaign began, and that 70% of those deaths are women and children. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the Security Council was debating a controversial resolution calling for a ceasefire. Israel has been under increasing pressure from the international community over civilian casualties in Gaza. We're joined now by Ido Aharoni, a former Israeli consul general in New York. Ambassador Aharoni, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Good to be back on your show. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so international pressure is mounting for a ceasefire, especially now that we are seeing this high casualty count and growing in Gaza. The U.S. has been asking Israel for the last few weeks to take a more targeted approach in going after Hamas in order to save civilian lives. But considering, as you know, that Hamas hides amongst civilians, is that possible?
It's very difficult to do. I think that the IDF, and I say this from firsthand knowledge, is doing its utmost, perhaps more than any other military in modern history, to avoid what we call collateral damage, to avoid, a situation where uninvolved civilians are getting hurt. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to achieve. The Americans were unable to do that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course, the Allied forces were unable to guarantee that during World War II. But I think that the IDF is doing its utmost. Now, international pressure is nothing new. Israel is the only country in the world where the world is expect Israel never to win any war. It's very difficult to engage in such a serious military challenge with both your hands are tied behind your back. It's very, very difficult to do that.
You know, many people actually think that Israel is running out of time to defeat Hamas before they lose all international support. We saw this week the UK, France, and Germany call for a ceasefire. Do you think Israel is going to be able to achieve their goal of eliminating Hamas completely before that happens and they do lose complete support?
Well, unfortunately, our political leadership overpromised by saying that they will eradicate Hamas off the face of the earth. Hamas is an idea, is a state of mind. Very difficult to eradicate an idea. What we should have done is commit to crippling and eliminating the military capacity of Hamas. And this is a goal that is certainly within reach. I think that Israel needs more time, perhaps a couple of more months, to get the job done. And perhaps the end result of that process will be the expulsion of Hamas leadership from Gaza. I don't know, but I can tell you that post October 7th, post the incomprehensible brutality that was demonstrated by Hamas, 1,400 people, many of them defenseless and powerless, were massacred and their bodies were mutilated by Hamas mercilessly. All bets are off. All bets are off. This is not your usual round of violence between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. All bets are off in a very big way. And so the international pressure can mount. I don't think Israel will relent in this fight against Hamas simply because the Israeli public will not accept it. We have over 300,000 displaced Israelis. This is a story that you will not read about in the mainstream media in the United States. We have hundreds of thousands of people that left their homes in the south and left their homes in the north. They will not come back to their homes unless the Israeli government will take out Hamas and Hezbollah. It's not just about Hamas, it's also about Hezbollah. And therefore, the international community can put pressure. I think that it's not going to work this time. I think that Israel will not relent. And this is the expectation of the Israeli public.
Let me ask you this, because you talk about this, the ideology of Hamas. Do you think that Israel is able to win the hearts and minds of Palestinians? Because you look at this, over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza displaced, and that's been one of the concerns of the Biden administration, not to lose the Palestinian people, because we see how Hamas treats them. Do you think that Israel is winning over Palestinians in their way of doing things?
Yeah, there are no clear victories in such a war. Certainly, we are unable to win the hearts and the minds of the Palestinian people, not in Gaza and not in the West Bank, because of deep-seated hatred. They learn from early childhood to hate Jews, and I'm sure all of our viewers have heard that Hamas terrorist calling his parents from a phone of one of the victims, bragging about the fact that he killed 10 Jews. He said, their blood is on my hands. He calls his parents. He's proud. That's what they educate them to do. This is the aspiration. And so, therefore, there's no chance. The only precedent in history, really in recent history, is what happened to the German people and the Japanese people post World War II. And that required a massive Marshall Plan put together by the United States with the help of the Allied forces. How do you take a nation that was responsible for the biggest atrocity in the history of civilization, Germany, and turn them into a nation that is both democratic and pacifistic? The only way to do it is to rebuild. And indeed, the Germans referred to the first day after the end of World War II as day zero. Everything started from scratch. So the only chance of doing something similar in Gaza would be when we can start something from scratch with the help of the international community. Israel cannot do this alone. We have to do everything from the beginning, undoing their educational system. That deep-seated hatred to Jews must stop, must end, because you see the result.
Ambassador Ido Aharoni, so much more to talk about with you tonight, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for taking time to speak to our viewers. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.